Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from cardswire.com, and that is the NFL Wire site from the USA Today NFL Network that covers the Arizona Cardinals. Seth Cox will not be my co-host in this edition of the show as we've hit the time of year where I have put together a series of interviews with the writers and managing editors of the NFL Wire sites that cover the Cardinals' 2022 opponents. That means 14 interviews, 14 segments that I will put together into 6 different shows over the next 3 weeks. Seth is off for the next 3 weeks, and we will have a regular show coming July 19th when we talk about the NFC West rankings, and then the following week as we hit training camp. And if and when Kyler Murray gets his new contract, we will have a regular show for that. But this edition of the show is the NFC West preview, where I have interviews and segments talking with the managing editors from the Rams Wire, Seahawks Wire, and Niners Wire to get to know more about the NFC West opponents that the Cardinals have. We will start with the LA Rams, as they are the first division opponent the Cardinals will face, followed by the Seattle Seahawks, who are the next opponent, and then the San Francisco 49ers. Sit back and enjoy this show. We've got 3 fantastic interviews coming next. First up with our opponent preview interviews is Cameron DaSilva from the RamsWire.com, a name you should recognize from the last 2 off seasons. He's the manager editor over at the Rams Wire. He also contributes to other NFL Wire sites and a contributor like myself to Sportsbook Wire, our USA Today owned site that focuses on sports betting. Cam has been on the show the last 2 seasons, and he's a familiar. The last 2 years, he's been a guest on this preview show. And as always, we get to talk about the Rams because the Cardinals will face them a guaranteed at least twice a year.
Yeah, what's going on, Jess? Good to be back.
Looking back, I mean, right now, it's got to be covering the Rams for the last, since Sean McVay, has got to be kind of a treat because they've been good. And then on top of that, and while there were stuff about Jared Goff, was like it was Jared Goff. The guy they let him go. They trade for Matthew Stafford, and it pays off immediately. It's kind of frustrating to see a team like go all in, like say, "Hey, we're doing this to win a championship game," and then do it, it. Only that's actually happened the last 2 seasons because the Bucs did it and the Rams did it, and the Cardinals attempted to do it last year. Only it didn't work out. They didn't work out because of a number of things. But let's look back at the Rams season that started, well, it didn't start out as well as everyone wanted it to, but ended exactly how a lot of us felt it would. So early this season, what were some of the issues that the Rams had early in the year that eventually went away?
Yeah, they started 3-0, and I mean, it's not like they were blowing teams out, but they were playing well enough to kind of get things going in the right direction. And then they hit a rough patch in the middle of the season. They lost to the Titans, 49ers, and Packers 3 straight games. And they looked really shaky in those games. And the biggest issue was Matthew Stafford. And it's crazy to say that because he was such a big part of their Super Bowl run and their postseason run. But he was just a big problem during those games. And over throwing way too many interceptions. I think he had probably 3 pick sixes in that span. He was careless with the football, and your franchise quarterback to be throwing it week in and week out. Went away a little bit during that stretch, but it finally came back together for that final, say, 6 games of the season, and they really got Darrell Henderson going, Sony Michel, and then Cam Akers came back for the postseason run, and not that he was terribly effective, but just having him with a little bit of a spark and some juice to the offense definitely helped. And the defense started playing much, much better as the season went on. Raheem Morris in his first year as a defensive coordinator made some important adjustments. They were moving Jalen Ramsey around a little bit. Ashawn Robinson started playing well up front. And then they got their linebacker situation figured out a little bit with Ernest Jones stepping up as a rookie. So everything just kind of came together later in the season, and obviously they came back and beat the Bucs and came back and beat the 49ers and then took care of business in the Super Bowl.
And so when Stafford was going through that rough patch, was there the fear that perhaps he was being the Lion Stafford and not what they'd hope he would be? Because that was like, oh, there it is, Matthew Stafford, big throws, but also very turnover prone.
It was funny looking at Twitter and all the analysts during that stretch, and they were like, this is kind of what Matthew Stafford is. He's got a big arm. He's aggressive. He's going to throw downfield, but he's also going to make some plays that really make you shake your head and wonder whether he's going to be someone who takes a team deep into the playoffs.
Well, and even in that first game with the Cardinals against the Rams, once the Cardinals got a lead, they got the turnover. Stafford was shaky the rest of that game.
Mm-hmm.
He just they had opportunities and he just was not on target. And by the end of the season, that went away. And obviously, what was the key ultimately to the defense? Was part of the fact that it was Raheem Morris's first year, part of the reason why the defense was not as stout early on. By the end of the season, they were fantastic, but
mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really Raheem just kind of getting into a rhythm and understanding the personnel that he had and how to best utilize guys. And then obviously a huge part of that was Von Miller coming aboard and really just taking that pass rush to another level with Leonard Floyd and Aaron Donald, and Greg Gaines starting at nose tackle was really a pleasant surprise too after Sebastian Joseph Day went down. So the combination of Raheem Morris figuring out how to best utilize his guys, especially Jalen Ramsey, they weren't really moving him around to shadow receivers in the beginning of the season. And then as things went on, they kind of understood that, hey, we need to put him on Hopkins. We need to put him on DK Metcalf and these other top receivers that they were facing week in and week out.
So, and that was the other part. Not only did they go out and make the trade for Stafford, they also made 2 in-season moves that were big, signing Odell Beckham, getting Von Miller. And both of those guys paid off. Now, Von's production wasn't great to start, but once the playoffs hit, he was a force to be reckoned with. Ultimately leading to a Super Bowl. Obviously Sean McVay's taken them to the Super Bowl now that they got a championship. What is the feeling around Rams Nation right now, obviously?
I mean, spirits are high. And the thing is with the Rams, they have this expectation now that they're going to compete and contend for a Super Bowl again. I mean, you have Stafford, you have Aaron Donald, you have Cooper Kupp, Jalen Ramsey, Leonard Floyd, all those guys are back. And Odell Beckham Jr., he hasn't re-signed yet, but it sure sounds like they're his team that he wants to re-sign with. So he could be back. They lost Von Miller, which hurts, but everyone's kind of expecting to have success again this season, which is crazy because the Rams went 12 years with not having a winning record, and now you get Sean McVay and a 9-7 or 10-7 season is kind of a letdown. Spoiled a little bit now, but everyone kind of expects them to win the NFC West again, make a deep playoff run, and try to defend this Super Bowl title again.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talking about. Let's move to the offseason. The Rams have had a busy one. They've lost some guys. They've paid a lot of money, making everyone think that the salary cap is a myth, and more. That's coming up next in Rise Up Sea Red. They're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals talking about it. So let's move to the offseason. So before we get to the general free agency, let's talk about the 3 major deals that they made. They gave Matthew Stafford a contract extension. They gave Aaron Donald a big raise without extending him. And then they made Cooper Kupp very, very rich. Understandably so, because Cooper Kupp had a fantastic season. He continues to prove just how good a receiver he is. Now, talk about the Donald one first, because I know that both he and McVay hinted at the possibility of retiring if they were to win. McVay was that a money play on both parts? Because it feels like it was for both. It was just, hey, I could walk away. McVay talking about the TV deal. McVay, he got an extension this offseason too, didn't he?
Not yet, but it's coming. It's coming. He basically said it's coming. Yeah.
And so, was that really just kind of a last season early leverage play?
It wouldn't. I mean, that was my initial thought with Donald, because he did have leverage, saying, "Hey, I can walk away. I've done literally everything a defensive player possibly can, except win MVP." Won a Super Bowl, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. What more does he have to accomplish? And he said, I guess when he came into the NFL, he said, "I'm going to play 8 years and be done." He's got family still in Pittsburgh and wants to spend more time with them. But I think it was a mix of a legitimate consideration to retiring, and also, hey, I deserve more money. I think he was probably the 5th or 6th highest paid defensive player in the NFL, which is not up to his standard of play.
Right.
I mean, he should be a little bit higher. So
in fairness, at one time he was
right,
but that happens
actually only for like a week, I think it was, because Khalil Mack came out right after
and
that and signed a deal that was just
every time
just slightly bigger. Yeah, exactly. So he wasn't the highest paid for long, but
so that makes sense.
He was at one point.
That Donald, he'd reached all his goals, and so that is the point where you're like, do I want to keep doing this? And
right.
And so it makes sense, but at the same time, it was quite convenient to go to the team. So, I could retire.
Yeah.
And all they did is just throw $40 million more over the course of his deal.
Yep.
And save cap space. How? Obviously, we know how that works. That on the surface, it looks like the Rams are doing, like, they're cheating. They're not. They're just gonna have to pay the piper down the line. It's gonna hurt in a couple of years. It's gonna hurt in a couple of years. The same thing with the Matthew Stafford deal. What was the motivation behind that? Because how many years did he have left coming into this year?
Just one. This would have been his last. 2022 would be his last season. So they wanted to. That was kind of their goal. They said it from the start when they traded for him last year. They wanted to extend him, and they believe he can play into his 40s. And so that was kind of something that they wanted to get done pretty quickly. And I was honestly surprised it didn't come together last offseason before he even took a snap. But now he gets $40 million a year, and quite honestly, I think if he was a free agent, he would have gotten much more than that. So. Not that he did the team a favor, but I think he could have gotten more and asked for more. And the structure of it helps them this year for sure. I think he has like a $13 million cap hit or something. It dropped from 23 million. So saved them a bunch of cap space this year, pushed money out, and the Rams will be paying him probably cap hits of around 50 something million for the final 3 years. So that's going to be pretty expensive down the road.
The teams are counting on that big boost to the salary cap over the next few years with a new TV deal coming in. And then on top of that, Cooper Kupp sets the record for guaranteed money for a receiver. Just going over what Tyreek Hill got. 5 years, 110. It's the money that's been going around to position players has been crazy. And I think it started with the Christian Kirk deal. When Christian Kirk got $17 million a year, all the top tier receivers, because Christian Kirk is a nice receiver, but he hasn't had 1,000-yard season even yet. He hasn't proven he can be a number one. But good for him. And all the top receivers yo, if Christian's getting that, what am I worth? And now we've got several receivers topping $20 million a year. And on top of that, they still saved. So in those 3 deals, they saved nearly $14 million in cap space. So the Rams obviously are willing to give a lot of money, because I know part of it's one of the quiet things that a lot of people don't know is that guaranteed money in a contract requires owners to put that same amount of money in an escrow account, which is weird. Is weird, but it becomes an excuse for owners to not fully guaranteed deals, because then they have to take assets and put it somewhere else where they don't have it throughout the course of the deal. But the ownership is willing to do that, and they're willing to take those risks. But not everything is perfect. Obviously, there's some big names that added the contract extensions. There have been some key losses from the Rams. Who are the biggest losses that they suffered this offseason? Because I know, for one, the offensive line is going to be much different with Andrew Whitworth retiring.
Yeah, there were a bunch of losses, and on both sides of the ball, and even on special teams, they cut Johnny Hecker, their punter. He kind of had a down year last year, so that didn't come as a huge surprise. On offense, you lost Austin Corbett, your right guard. You lost Andrew Whitworth to retirement. So those will be some pretty significant losses on the offensive line. They have Joe Noteboom, who's going to replace Whitworth at left tackle, and then they drafted Logan Bruss, who was a right tackle in college and is expected to play right guard. So they're hoping those two guys can really just fill those holes. And then on defense, there were even bigger losses. Von Miller, obviously, we talked about. That's a huge departure for the pass rush. Still have Leonard Floyd, but the guy opposite him, you have Justin Hollins, Terrell Lewis. Those are nowhere close to Von Miller type players. So they're going to have to get a lot out of those two guys. Sebastian Joseph Day, their nose tackle, left. Darius Williams, their starting cornerback, left. So those are some pretty considerable losses that they suffered. And then they traded away Robert Woods after they signed Allen Robinson. So that was kind of a financial situation, and he's coming off a torn ACL. So you go with someone who's healthier than Allen Robinson, kind of ship out Robert Woods, get a draft pick and some money in return, and kind of reset almost at the wide receiver position with Robinson coming in and taking Woods' place. You
guys had a couple of lower key losses as well to the Chargers on defense. Troy Reeder was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Who was the other linebacker? I can't remember his name.
Okoronkwo went to the Texans.
Okay, yeah.
Reeder was the linebacker that went to the Chargers.
Okay. There was a safety, I think, as well that I was talking to when I was talking to Gavino Borges on his preview show. There were a couple of former Rams that went over.
Sebastian Joseph Day, the nose tackle.
Okay, so it was Joseph Day and it was
Reeder. Joseph Day and Reeder.
There it is.
Yep, those two.
So, but yeah, how impactful are those losses going to be? Obviously, the Rams have great top end talent, and arguably, what actually helped them was a lot of the depth. We got Greg Gaines, who stepped in. Ernest Jones emerged at linebacker. When you had when you had Eric Weddle, Weddle re-retired, right?
Yeah, he re-retired. He said he's never coming back.
All right, so those losses, and we thought the same thing last year, is that they gained some guys, but they did suffer some losses. Who do you think are the most critical losses of that group?
Outside of Von Miller, I would say Darius Williams is a pretty big loss at cornerback. Obviously have Jalen Ramsey on one side, but they don't have much proven talent beyond him at cornerback. They went out and reacquired Troy Hill, who left for the Browns in free agency last year, brought him back in a draft day trade this year. So got some experience back there. And then you have David Long.
Good too.
Yeah. He was a solid player, can play inside, outside. David Long, who really struggled in that first game against the Cardinals, got benched, had his role reduced, and then kind of stepped back up in the playoffs. So he's got some experience, a decent player. He can play inside, outside as well. And then they drafted Jacoby Durant and Darian Kendrick at cornerback. So not the most proven group of players at corner. Darius Williams was a really good zone corner who could. He was a ball hawk, had no interceptions somehow last year, but I think he had like 4 or 5 the year before. So he's a considerable loss. And then I would say that Sebastian Joseph Day, even though he was replaced so well by Greg Gaines last year, he's a really good pass rusher as a nose tackle and a really good run defender. So he can play nose tackle, he can play defensive end. That's a good pickup for the Chargers, with Brandon Staley reuniting with him, getting him back on his defensive line. So I think those losses are going to be felt by the Rams this year.
The gains. So the biggest move, I think, well, obviously, that you talked about adding Troy Hill in the trade. They trade Robert Woods, but they signed Allen Robinson. And so now you've got Allen Robinson and you've got Cooper Kupp, and it feels like Odell Beckham's going to re-sign later once he's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think Allen Robinson can add to that offense, one? And two, who are the other additions that they made this offseason?
I really like the Allen Robinson signing, and I didn't see it coming at all. He's really, the Rams over the years have kind of had a similar blend of receivers: Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Van Jefferson, all very good route runners. None of them are really burners or big body physical receivers on the outside. So you bring in Robinson, who's one of the best contested catch guys in the league, and he's not going to run a 4.2, but he can stretch the field because of how good he is in these 50-50 ball situations, going up and coming down with passes over defenders and making tough contested catches where a defender is draped over him. He doesn't need to be wide open to be open. He's someone that Matthew Stafford, like Calvin Johnson, is really going to enjoy playing with, and I think they're going to have a strong connection. And then the other big addition was Bobby Wagner. That was kind of a signing that some saw coming after the Seahawks released him. He said he wanted to play against them, and
it was inevitable.
Yeah, it really was. Another guy chasing a ring, a veteran player who wanted to come back home to LA. So it fit perfectly with the whole narrative and just the fact that the Rams could use linebacker help. And it's not a position that they prioritized at all in the last 5 years with Sean McVay. They've gotten by with Corey Littleton, Troy Reeder, kind of lesser known guys at inside linebacker. But now you bring in Bobby Wagner, who's going to work with Ernest Jones, and they can work. Really, they've been a single linebacker defense where they only have one inside linebacker on the field most of the time, 5 DBs and the defensive line and pass rushers. But now you have Ernest Jones and Bobby Wagner, where one of them can blitz, they can both cover, they can both step up and stop the run. So a nice combination there that they added with Bobby Wagner too.
And they end up, so defensively, what you really like with what the Rams do, while they have to have this depth stepped up, at every level of the defense, they have a star. You've got Aaron Donald, You've got Bobby Wagner, and you've got Jalen Ramsey. Then you've got Matthew Stafford at quarterback. The line is a question this year, but they have star power at receiver. They have Cam Akers recovering. Hopefully he's back. And Darrell Henderson's still there, right?
Yep.
It's just Sony Michel right now. I think he's completely unsigned still, right?
I think did he go to the Dolphins? I think he went to the Dolphins.
I can't remember seeing that. I guess I can probably look that up.
Yep, he signed with the Dolphins.
So they have all.
He wasn't someone that the Rams were going to bring back.
They have all the running backs because of
Mike McDaniel is just going to run the ball 40 times a game.
Well, in fairness, in his history with the 49ers is that it doesn't matter how many running backs you have. Half of them are going to get actually all of them will get hurt, and you'll need production from every single one of them, and they'll all perform well. Like just the 49ers.
They all have like 600 yards.
So like one guy gets hurt, they bring in another guy. Guys you've never heard of, Jeff Wilson, and he becomes great. What? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But
that's amazing.
Now the one thing that the Rams have not had much action with is the draft, because they keep trading away their first and second picks, and so they had selections from the third round on. It starts with Logan Bruss, who you already mentioned, who's slated to be a right guard out of Wisconsin. South Carolina, they went with some smaller name guys. So cornerback Jacoby Durant. You've got Notre Dame running back Kyron Williams, but he got hurt. Is he healthy yet, or he's going to be hurt to going into training camp?
I think they said he's going to be back early in training camp, but he's hurt right now. Something with his, I think he broke his foot or something with his foot.
Quentin Lake, safety out of UCLA, round 6. Darian Kendrick, cornerback out of Georgia, round 6. And this player, I'm very jealous of. He's Daniel Hardy out of Montana State. He's a guy that no one really heard of, but he is an athletic freak and played. And granted, Montana State's not exactly a powerhouse by any means, but he was moved to the edge for the first time last season and was incredibly productive. He is a little undersized, like Hassan Reddick, but his measurables are incredible. I wished the Cardinals could have landed him either in the 7th or as an undrafted guy. I know it was a guy that they that they visited with. And so
Mhm.
I was a little bummed about that. He's a guy who is super raw. I don't think he's going to be a star, but he could be one of those players that develops into something productive.
Yep.
Which of those draft picks do you anticipate will have the most immediate impact this season?
I think it'll be Bruss at right guard, but obviously that's the given choice, being he was their first pick and fills an immediate need. But I think Darian Kendrick can surprise some people at cornerback. Doesn't have good measurables, doesn't have good speed, and didn't test well leading up to the draft. But he played at Clemson, played at Georgia, and was pretty solid. I mean, he's not going to be someone who defends down the field on man-to-man coverage and runs with all these fast receivers, but you get him in zone and you get him looking at the quarterback, he can make some plays on the ball. So I think if they do have an injury or somebody kind of regresses a little bit at cornerback, I think he's someone who can step up and really play well.
Coming in next on the Rise Up See-Red podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web, we will look ahead to the 2022 season, hopes, expectations, what Cam thinks the ceiling and the floor is for this team moving forward. That's coming next on Rise Up See-Red. We're back on the Rise Up See-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's look ahead to the 2022 season. Obviously, they already hit the ceiling. Although it was a roundabout way to get there, going into last season, the Rams, I felt, and many felt, were kind of the favorites to win it all. I felt that Tampa Bay, it was going to be hard for them to repeat, and for that reason, even with some of the losses that the Rams had, made them probably the favorite for me. I thought they were, and they ended up doing it. However, it came different from how it happened because they started strong, were a little unsteady in the middle. The Cardinals were ahead for the first half of the season, and the Rams finally overcame the Cardinals in the final 2-3 weeks of the year, and ultimately won the division, rolled through the playoffs, won the Super Bowl. Big picture, that's what everyone expected. The Rams to win the division, be competitive into the playoffs, and potentially win the Super Bowl. On the Cardinals, on the other hand, entering last season, they thought, okay, they could compete for a wild card spot, but probably weren't going to be good enough to overtake the Rams. When they start 7-0 and 10-2, we're like, yeah, they should win this thing. But big picture, at the end of the season, the Cardinals were exactly what people thought they could be at best. A team not quite good enough to overtake the Rams and would make the playoffs, but because they faced the Rams in the first round, of course, they ended up out. So now that they've won the Super Bowl, what are reasonable expectations for the Rams in 22? And what do you think their ceiling and what do you think their floor is? I think obviously we think the ceiling is going to be a repeat championship, but if things go wrong, so what are reasonable expectations, and what is the worst case scenario for the Rams team this year?
I honestly think worst case scenario is like a 10-7 season and a wild card and make it into the first round. And I mean, the NFC is weak, so if you win your division, you're probably going to have a favorable matchup in that first round. I could see them easily winning. I can see the Cardinals winning the division. It's just they don't wow me, and the 49ers don't either. I don't know what it is about the 49ers. They always play the Rams tough, but going into the season, I lack confidence in the 49ers this year. I don't know if it's the Trey Lance thing or Jimmy.
Here's the number. Jimmy Garoppolo, 31-14 as a starter for the 49ers. Kyle Shanahan with any other starter, 8-28. And so I get that the 49ers have a very talented roster. Overall, they have, so aside from the quarterback position. However, when you look at like the odds to win the division and the 49ers are just behind the Rams, I'm like, that makes no sense. I think the 49ers I think it'll be competitive.
I don't see it.
But unless Trey Lance is great, I think they're going to be a 7-9 win team.
Right. You're counting on basically a rookie quarterback to come in and really have a good season. And
he's not Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes came in his second year and dominated. Lance is not nearly as experienced as a quarterback as Mahomes was.
Right. Yeah, I don't see that happening. And it's just I don't like you said, I can see them being competitive, but I don't see them just like going 12-5, 13-4, and dominating the division and winning. I still think it's the Rams division to lose. Cardinals, I think, could be good too. Kyler Murray is just such a weapon, and once they have DeAndre Hopkins back from that suspension, I think they're going to be a good competitive team again. But I would say the worst case scenario for the Rams is like 10-7, make a wild card at worst, and then best case scenario is a repeat. I can easily see that happening. It's going to be like I said, the NFC is weaker, so getting to the Super Bowl is going to be less challenging than actually winning and beating a team like the Bills, or I mean the Raiders, the Broncos. There's just so many good teams,
and we
the
have
Chargers.
To face
There's so many
the
good
AFC
teams.
West this year.
Yeah, I know. You get the Chiefs, you get the Chargers, the Raiders, and Broncos. None of those games are easy. So, the Rams schedule is the hardest in the NFL, so maybe they trip up and lose 8 games and go 9-8, but I can see them going 10-7 or better and winning the division.
Completely reasonable, because I think a 9-8 would be very, very disappointing, to say the least. You've already kind of talked about it, but as you look at those games against the Cardinals, you see the Cardinals as a team that could overtake them. And as we look at, we've got the 2 games this season, and last year the Cardinals finally got a win. But it's funny in the NFC West is that every team has another team in the division, no matter how good or bad they are. It's their kryptonite. I mean, the Cardinals can't beat the Rams can't beat the 49ers, and the Seahawks can't beat the Rams, and the Cardinals. And also that the Seahawks can't seem to manage to beat the Seahawks and Cardinals. They can't beat each other at home. That's just we can't beat each other at our home stadium. Is the weird part. Seahawks are going to be yuck this year. They're not going to be awful, but they're going to be good enough that they're going to be in this purgatory 5-6 wins. But
yeah, exactly. Not good enough to get the top quarterback.
No, but good
or not bad enough.
Good for them. I'm all for it. Although we still have to face Russell Wilson. We don't avoid that now. I think that the Cardinals in both of those games against the Rams, if you're looking at how, for me, like a road game like in LA, if the Cardinals won, would be both games as kind of toss-ups, but would be considered a steal for the Cardinals to win in LA. And likewise, if the Rams were to win in Arizona, it would be kind of be a steal, even though I think that Rams fans probably view the Cardinals more as a team that they should beat, but don't expect to beat.
Yeah, that first game too, because Hopkins is 6 games, right? His
so
suspension.
Hopkins will be out, but you also won't have Beckham.
Yep, for that first game.
So it'll be 2 teams without one of their top receivers. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting matchup early on. I was hoping that the Hopkins suspension would not cover any division games, and it covers 2 of them.
How many others? 2 of them.
But one of them Seattle, so they should win that game.
That's not.
They better win that game.
You should be able to beat Seattle without him.
And
exactly.
It comes down to, ultimately, it'll almost always come down to, with a team as a division as competitive as the NFC West, is that when you have good teams, the division record matters. And that's almost what it came down to, is that the Cardinals actually did they finish 4-2? The Rams, or was it 3-3?
The Rams lost 1 to the Cards and 2 to the 49ers.
That was a rare case where the division record didn't determine the division winner, because the Rams had the extra win at the end of the year. But the Cardinals went 4-2. But that's kind of for me, it's always, if you want to make the playoffs, you're going to have to go 500 in your division in the NFC West. And if you want to win the division, you need to win at least 4 games. And unless the Cardinals and collapse in the second half. They
were a mess at the end of the season.
Well, it is just fun, which is funny because there are so many reasons why. And it wasn't just Hopkins. It was a number of things. It was, first, J.J. Watt goes down. And so the defense, which was the difference maker early in the season, because the offense was great, but the defense was elite. And so they were getting turnovers early in the game. And so the offense would score. It would almost go like this: start on defense, get a stop, get a score, get a field goal or create a turnover, and then they never look back. They played exceptionally well from ahead, and that's the way their defense was built. J.J. Watt goes down, and then Kyler Murray gets hurt, and DeAndre Hopkins gets hurt. The offensive line, the offensive line drops in play, and then they lose. Not only that, they lose Rob Alford and Marco Wilson in the secondary. Chandler Jones only has 5.5 sacks after week 1. And so it wasn't just Hopkins, and that was the biggest one because offensively they seemed to take a hit and no one else was stepping up in plays. But on the defensive side of the ball, they weren't picking up because the defense took 2 notches down, the offense took a step down, and so it became very difficult for them to win games, especially when Kyler wasn't 100% and there were guys weren't open, and then the Rams got hot, and so that playoff loss was just an embarrassment. But nobody played well in that game. And the Rams, I guess, were a team of destiny because, holy cow, when it looked like that they were going to jack stomp the Bucs, I was like, okay, here they go.
I can't believe they blew that lead. Unbelievable.
But then Cooper Kupp happened.
The rescue.
And then Cooper Kupp happened in the Super Bowl. Fantastic. All right. This is Cam DaSilva from theramswire.com. Now, if you're looking for the Rams Wire, you have to include because there is a Rams Wire that is not our network. So theramswire.usatoday.com. Cam DaSilva is our managing editor over there. You can also find him on varied contributing, helping out on other wire sites at Sportsbook Wire. And where else can our listeners interact with you on social media if you've got that?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Cam DaSilva.
Pretty straightforward. All right. A big thanks to Cam DaSilva for coming on to preview that show. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we have our next interview about the NFC West, the Seattle Seahawks. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We have as a special guest, as we've actually had him the past 2 years, but one of our previews will be for the Seattle Seahawks, and friend of the show, Tim Weaver, who covered the team, who covered the Carolina Panthers the last 2 seasons and was managing editor over at Panthers Wire for this USA Today NFL Wire network, is now covering the team of his preference, the Seattle Seahawks, for the past roughly a year. Tim, we're glad to have you on. We just want to get you started. Thanks for coming on for the 3rd year in a row. This is actually, I love my co-host. I do enjoy these shows quite a bit because as connected as we are on our network, we're not super connected on the network because we're all in different parts of the country doing our own thing, covering our own teams. But we're glad to have you on. How was this switch from Panthers to Seahawks? I know the Seahawks are your team of preference.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me, but I enjoyed it for a few months, and then it all kind of fell apart, starting with Wilson's finger injury against the Rams, and then I don't know. If you're looking for someone to blame, Seahawks fans, it was me. I brought the bad juju over from Carolina. You have nothing to look forward to except 5-12 seasons now for the foreseeable future until they find their next guy. So it's my fault. My bad, everybody.
It's all right. I mean, as Cardinals fans, we do not mind Seattle struggling because they've been a problem for the Cardinals for a lot of years, actually. But this has been an interesting rivalry because of all the dominance that the Seahawks have had, especially at home. This has been really even because they can't seem to beat the Cardinals in Seattle, and the Cardinals can't seem to beat the Seahawks at home. It's been a weird dynamic over the last several years.
It's very even, and I feel like that's kind of the same for Arizona with the other. There's like a rock paper scissors thing going on in the NFC West. Is like the Seahawks beat the Niners beat the Rams beat the Seahawks, and the Cardinals.
Every team has a kryptonite. Every team has a kryptonite. We can't beat the Rams. The Rams can't beat the 49ers.
Yeah. And we can't beat the Rams.
It's just it's wacko. Is that it's just this? There's every team in the NFC West has a division rival that just no matter what year it is, it's kryptonite. But we want to get kind of, as we've done the last couple of years with Panthers, we want to talk about kind of progress logically through what happened in 2021 major losses, major gains, and kind of the outlook for this coming season. Obviously, the big story is that of Russell Wilson and his trade, but we'll get to that. Tell us, Tim, about last season. What exactly happened? We experienced that, obviously, the injury to Russell Wilson and his finger, but we take it back a little bit further, and we start before last season. There was, how bad was the blood between Russell Wilson and the Seahawks entering last season? I mean, he's a super professional, and he played his butt off for a good while this season, and we've seen the highs from Wilson. But how much do you think that the stuff that happened before last season bled into the season?
I think it was pretty bad. We're still learning the details of this. I actually did a story this morning about Wilson pushing the former offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer out. Now, publicly, he's always going to say, like, I'm here in Seattle. I want to win in Seattle, and my coach is my coach, and I love my teammates, and I love God, and all the above. He's always going to have that positive exterior, but I guess behind the scenes, it can be a different story sometimes. We just found this out yesterday. Wilson was pushing Schottenheimer out the door, even though like he did better with him from like 2018 to like the mid 2020. Things started falling off around like week 9, the middle of the 2020 season, but he was playing better than he ever had before. Schottenheimer was great. As great as it can be with Wilson. Like, his game has flaws. I think he's still a top 10 quarterback, still very talented, but his game does have flaws. And like, he was playing as well as I think he's ever going to. We'll see if that's true, like how well Denver does with him, but they were doing magnificently. And like, he just fell out with Schottenheimer and apparently helped push him out the door, even though publicly he was saying, this is my guy, I support my coordinator, we're all on the same page here. But I'm not that surprised to learn that. Like, he has this, he's a good guy. Like, DK Metcalf was joking with Kevin Hart. This is another story I did yesterday. Like, he seems like he's just a very positive kind of guy, but like, nobody can be positive all the time, 100%. Like, it's always going to be a little bit of a facade, right? Like, you have to get disappointed sometimes, especially over the course of a 17-game season. You're going to have ups and downs, and like, we just never saw the bad parts of it. But now we're starting to learn just how bad the relationship had deteriorated. And there were, rumblings. It wasn't like this came out of nowhere. Remember the previous offseason, they floated these list of teams that Wilson would be willing to waive his no trade clause for. Like, I'm not asking for a trade, but just in case, these are the 4 teams I'd be willing to go to, We made it clear that they were the
I don't want a divorce, but
right.
I'd be willing to
if
date
Jennifer
these 4
Lawrence
other women.
Call, I'm not saying
if
no.
you decide to let me go. What?
Yeah, exactly.
This is absurd. It's absurd. But so ultimately, what went wrong last season? Was it almost all due to injury, whether it was Russell Wilson's or Chris Carson's, or Seattle dealt with a number of injuries last season. What did them in? What led to the state of what they were, missing the playoffs and being the worst team in the NFC West, which is something that they're not accustomed to being?
Well, the injuries definitely played a part. Wilson's finger being number 1 on the list. He missed a few weeks, and Geno Smith did reasonably well for a backup. Like, he wasn't amazing, but he did a decent job. And they rushed back too soon. Like, the Green Bay game, he was terrible. That was the worst that I've ever seen him play. I think that was easily the worst game of his career. He definitely shouldn't have played that game. Probably should. It took him like 2 or 3 more weeks to get back up to speed, and by then, season's over. It was already too late. But more than anything, more than the injuries, I would say, it was just a long time coming. The draft, like, I think they did a good job this year. I like that they totally changed their approach. But like, since 2013, like, every class, you had those 3 great classes, 2010, 2011, 2012. When you get the Legion of Boom, you get all those pieces for the championship run. But since 2013, the draft, you had like the odd hit, like Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf, but by and large, just terrible returns in the draft for 9 years, and nobody can overcome that. I don't care. Like, Wilson kind of like held the ship together as well as he could, but it was just an imbalanced roster. You just have too many holes here and there, and that's something that I think you can probably relate to. Like, you have a really good mobile young quarterback who's just kind of carrying you. You can only take that so far, and your team's eventually going to implode. Especially after teams start making adjustments, like the defenses you see week 1 are going to be dramatically different than what you see in week 10. It's very difficult to maintain a high level of play over a full season. So you need a complete roster, and theirs have slowly just kind of decayed to the point where they had to hit the reset button, and that became clear. I think like it was the Chicago game to me. That was like they went into the fourth quarter with a 10-point lead. This is a bad team. It's going nowhere. Nick Foles was playing for them that week. It was a snow game in Seattle of all things, but like they blew that lead, and by it was like a big mistake on defense, and then big mistake on special teams, and then a big turnover. And it was like all three phases just failed at the wrong possible time. And it felt like that was like the moment, like, okay, like something big is going to happen here. Either it's going to be Pete Carroll's going to go or Russell Wilson's going to go. In the weeks after, like everything they said publicly was like, we're going to hold this together. So, you have to go with what they say. But that was the point where I said, okay, like something big is going to change here. I don't know who it's going to be, but like they can't go on pretending that the ship is okay the way that it is.
And that takes us to the offseason where this is basically happening. So coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best ever Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and talk about the losses and the additions. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. This takes us to the offseason, where the biggest move is obviously there were two large decisions that the Seahawks made. One was trading Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos, a move that I think didn't really surprise anyone, but the fact that it happened, it changed the landscape of the NFC. One, changed the landscape of the AFC with the trade. But not only that, and then they cut ties with Bobby Wagner. Talk first a little bit about the Russell Wilson deal, how it went down, if the Seahawks got enough. And for me, it comes down to it kind of, and we talked about this before we started recording, is did they really decide that they chose Pete Carroll over Russell Wilson, which I find mind-boggling.
Yeah, that was basically what it came down to. It felt that one of those two had to go because you have two fundamentally different visions for how you want to run the offense. Pete Carroll wants to run the ball. He doesn't care who's in his backfield. He doesn't care if he has a Hall of Fame quarterback. Apparently, he wants to run the ball on first down, run the ball on second down, and then do whatever you can on third down. That's how he wants to play the game. I disagree with it. I think it's in the wrong decade. It's the wrong era of football, but that's what he wants to do. And all along, Wilson, naturally, he wanted to go the other way. Like, give me the ball. I'm a top 5 quarterback. Put the ball in my hands. Your offense has always been best when you go up tempo. When I'm essentially the play caller, that was the best offense they had. Whether it was Darrell Bevel or Schottenheimer or Waldron, when they went no huddle, that was always the best offense that they had. So naturally, he wanted more of that. But Carroll just that's not in his DNA. That's not how he wants to run an offense. So you had to make a choice there, and I think they made the wrong one. I kind of understand where they're coming from. If you remember this, like that day, that was when Aaron Rodgers signed his new deal with the Packers. I think it was like 4 years and $200 million, $50 million a year, basically. And they have the same agent. And they've always pegged the Wilson contract talks to Rodgers. And I wrote an article like right after the Rodgers thing. I said, this basically pushes his price out of a reasonable range. Like, you can't give Wilson $50 million a year for what he's been giving you the last year and a half. Even though he's still a very good quarterback, I wouldn't pay him $50 million a year. I guess the Broncos are going to disagree. But it made sense. And then I finished the article, I shared it, and then went for a walk. And by the time I was back, they had traded him. So I'm like, okay, this happened a little faster than I thought it would. But I understand where they were coming from as far as the timing goes. But the details are the problem. Like, I like the picks they got for a 33-year-old quarterback. That's a good haul. I really like Shelby Harris. I think he's a tremendously underrated lineman. I like Noah Fant as a tight end, but they didn't get a good quarterback in exchange, and that just sours the whole thing beyond repair. Drew Lock is still very young. He's 25 years old. Like, I was a different person at 25 than I am now, 37, and we all change over time. We all grow. He may not be the best quarterback that he's going to be yet, but right now he's like what, like 25th, something like that, 26, 27. You got to put him somewhere in that range as far as the top 32 in the league.
And
So
like even looking ahead, like right now, he's not even beating out Geno Smith currently. Now, granted, Geno's been in the system for a couple of years, but still, he's not even beating Geno Smith out at this point.
Yeah, that says everything you need to know, even though like Smith does have the experience advantage. He's been the backup for the last 3 years. But if your athleticism, if your overall like package can't beat out Geno Smith, the same as he didn't beat out Teddy Bridgewater last year, and they're basically the same guy. Those two, like they had pretty much identical PFF grades last year. You couldn't beat out Bridgewater. What makes you think you can beat out Geno Smith? So unless Geno, I've always expected Geno's going to win this battle. I expect him to start week 1 against Denver. The only way Locke is going to get in there probably is if Smith either fails, bombs totally, or he gets injured. Then we'll see. Like, hopefully I'm wrong about him. Hopefully he does like Josh Allen leap is probably too much to hope for. That I don't know if we've ever seen that before. I don't know if we'll ever see that again. Like you go from being like a number 30 quarterback to like number 2 now out of nowhere. That just has never happened before and probably won't happen again. But if he does like a Ryan Tannehill, like if you go from like being a mediocre to like a top 10-ish, top 15-ish, like you would take that
in the right offense with the right weapons, and when he's being protected by a lot of the scheme that they've got. Now he's got the skill set to do it, but that scheme definitely protects him because that is a run first offense. And maybe that's kind of what Pete Carroll envisions, is that unlocking Locke's potential with a strong running game. Bobby Wagner,
play action. That's what he does best. That may be the only thing that he does really well is throw play action. But like you're going to see plenty of that. Like I can guarantee that. So they'll do well with play action. But I just you need to be able to do more than that if you're going to stick around as a starter.
That takes us to the Bobby Wagner move. Were you surprised by that? Was this a case where it was time to move on, a la Von Miller with the Broncos? It had his skill set diminished, or were they just ready to move on to Jordan Brooks? And how much does it sting that he landed with the Rams? Because that seemed inevitable.
Yeah, it's devastating. I just as like a fan, losing Bobby Wagner hurts so much more than Wilson. Like the way that he carried himself to like the very high level, like nobody played. Like you can argue maybe Luke Kuechly for a while. They were like 1 and 2, 1A, 1B, however you want to put it.
Good.
But like
just so good and
Wagner
so consistently good.
Yes, consistently the best off-ball linebacker for like 10 years. And like that, I don't know if anyone's done that. Maybe Ray Lewis. I don't know if he was the best guy for 10 years. But like just an unbelievable run of play. And for them to do the way that they did it was horrible. I was so upset. They like claim there's a miscommunication issue, but apparently like the story goes, they didn't even tell him. Like he found out that he was getting cut by the Adam Schefter tweeting it out. And that I was just, I don't usually do this. I said, shame on you, man. Like you did that to Bobby Wagner, like America's sweetheart. He is like the nicest guy, the greatest, sweetest, most innocent professional athlete that I've ever covered. And like to do him like that changed my perception of the front office entirely. Like you can argue, this isn't the first time this has happened. First of all, like Richard Sherman kind of forced his way out. Earl Thomas kind of forced his way out. And like Russell Wilson, I get it. Like I didn't like the trade, but I understand. But like to do Bobby Wagner the way they did was just excruciating and like terrible on a fan level. But it did make sense from a salary cap perspective. Like they're saving like 15-20 million. It was a big cap hit that they saved themselves. So like I get that part of it. And he's not the same Bobby Wagner that he was in like 2015 at his peak. But like even if he's like 85% Bobby Wagner, that's still really damn good. That's a great linebacker. Like it's going to be really hard to find someone who can play at that level. It may be 30 years before they find another linebacker like that. Even if linebackers are still a thing 30 years from now, who knows? But no, I didn't like that at all for many reasons, especially the way that they did it to him. Brooks is a very good young linebacker. He improved a lot. I think he was pretty terrible his rookie year, but he took a big leap forward, especially in coverage last season. So I understand the confidence they have in him. He's going to be the new Mike, the guy with the green dot on his helmet this year. So he's calling the plays on defense, and that makes sense. But Cody Barton is actually going to take over Wagner's spot at MLB, and he did really well. Wagner got hurt. I honestly think he was playing hurt near the end of last season, which is why it was like the first snap against Detroit, week 17, that he got injured. He was done for the rest of the year. And then Barton came in and he played really well, but it's only 2 games, so it's a small sample size, so it's hard to say. But I think they'll be okay, just because linebackers aren't as important as they used to be. But it's very, very hard to lose a player on that level, and B, to see him go to a division rival, which he'll probably be in the Pro Bowl the next 4 or 5 years there, and I guarantee he's going to have several clutch, devastating plays against the Seahawks when they play twice a year. That's just the way.
Yeah, undoubtedly.
I won't even be mad. I'll say, yeah, go punish me. We deserve it.
All right. Moving on. So the biggest names that they lost, Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner. Any other significant losses that the Seahawks had in the offseason?
Dwayne Brown, the left tackle, is probably a big one. He's going to be 30. He's turning 37 right before next season starts. So that's another one. It makes sense. He's not going to be your long-term answer there. So it made sense to move on, but you can't assume that Charles Croft is going to play at the same level Dwayne Brown was. That's not fair for any rookie, even if you're a pick. How often do you see a left tackle come into the league and play at a high level? That's very rare, first of all. But to expect him to play anywhere near Dwayne Brown, I don't know if he's probably a borderline. He could be a Hall of Famer, maybe not, but he's been playing at a very high level for 14 years. You don't see that very often. So they're going to take a big step back at left tackle, at least for a while, before Cross comes up to speed. I have concerns about him, but he'll probably be good, but it's going to take a while. He's not going to come in week 1 and just kick ass from the start. That's not going to happen.
And that offensive line is going to be. So let's move on to the additions. So the any key additions. So they got Chris Carson coming back. He's still not recovered. Rashad Penny resigns. Is it a 1-year deal that he got?
Yeah, 1 year.
Okay. And he played fantastic over the second half of the season. Of course, with his situation has always been, he's got to stay healthy. I loved Rashad Penny coming out of college, and I was very, very disappointed when the Seahawks drafted him.
Yeah.
All those highlights when he was at San Diego State, almost all of them came against Arizona State because, so I got to see my Sun Devils getting trampled by Rashad Penny over and over and over and over again. So obviously the trade brought over Shelby Harris, a nice addition to the defensive line, Noah Fant at tight end. You've also got now, what else? Who are the other key players that have joined the team? I know they also lost a couple. I think DJ Jones, not DJ Jones.
DJ Reed.
DJ Reed left. They bring back Quandre Diggs, but who are the main additions that they made in free agency before we talk about their draft picks?
The big free agents, they're pretty notoriously cheap in free agency. They're never going to make a big splash signing. I was hoping they'd go Von Miller or Chandler Jones, but that was realistically probably never going to happen. But the big one they got was Uchenna Nwosu. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I am not. But I really like that signing. They got him 2 years, $20 million, I believe, which is the most expensive free agent signing they've ever done. I watched a lot of Justin Herbert, whenever Seahawks were on last year. I'm going to try to catch the Chargers because I like watching Herbert. And he just kind of flashed. He stood out to me several times. Oh, that guy's good. I like watching him, but he's not a great pass rush threat. But he just he does a little bit of everything. He'll get his hand on passes. He defends the run. He's good in coverage. He's just a really good all around defender who's pretty underrated. So I really like that pickup there. But that was the only splash free agent signing. The rest of them, they just mostly kept their own guys. Aside from Dwayne Brown and DJ Reed, they brought back pretty much the whole team. That they lost Wilson, Wagner, Brown, and Reed. The rest of it, they pretty much brought back everybody. So it's largely the same team, except a couple key pieces.
And who are the impact draft picks? Obviously, Charles Cross drafted 9th overall, expect to be their starting left tackle. I saw a projected starting offensive line where Abraham Lucas out of Washington State, right?
Yes.
He is projected to be the starting right tackle because you're going to have bookend rookies. Scary stuff.
Yeah, scary.
Didn't Austin Blythe? They signed him, right?
Yeah, he's going to be their center. I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather they've got J.C. Treader or somebody who's a little bit more proven like that. But no, the offensive line is going to be really bad. I don't think they're going to be like PFF has them ranked dead last in the NFL. I think that's probably a little extreme, but it is going to be pretty bad, at least for a while. I know that. But Ken Walker, like he's the big one. Like you had to expect. I kind of jokingly like my last. When I'm so sick of mock drafts. You know what like mock season is for us. I did like 3 running backs in my final mock draft. It's kind of a joke, but like Ken Walker was one that I was like certain, like he just felt like he's a Seahawks back end. Like I had him at 41 in like a few of my mocks just because it seemed so obvious. I love Rashad Penny, and he finished this season, as you said, very, very strong. He actually tied Josh Allen for the most yards per carry in the league for the season. And like, even though he did nothing from like week 1 to week 12 pretty much, but he just exploded so well down the stretch. So I expect Penny to start, but like if he regresses even a little bit, or if he like hurts his pinky finger, they're going to put Ken Walker out there. Like his job is going to be his eventually, no matter what Penny does. It's kind of unfortunate for him, but Walker is just a great athlete. He's a stud. That was the one, like I did a lot of watching the OT class because I thought they would take 2 guys this year, but Walker was the other guy that I watched. I really enjoyed watching aside from the tackles in this class. He's going to be an impact player. I don't like the fact that they're a run first offense. You know, I disagree with the philosophy, but it is what it is, and I think he's going to be really good at it.
Now, outside of that, coming up next on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We'll come back and wrap things up with Tim Weaver talking about the kind of the expectations and the outlook for the 2022 season. That's coming next on Rise of Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, and we're here with Tim Weaver from SeahawksWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering the Seattle Seahawks. We talked about the offseason, talked about last season, and now we're looking ahead to the coming season. Do you, first and foremost, foresee them making any other move at quarterback? Are they really going to roll with Geno Smith and Drew Lock?
I think they are. Like I'm not happy about it. I've been doing quarterback lists this entire offseason, hoping they'll do it. But like, if they were going to do it, I feel like they would have done it by now. By now, your only choices are Baker Mayfield and Jimmy Garoppolo. Both.
and honestly, Seattle, there's no way San Francisco's traded Garoppolo to them. And Baker, that's going to be a funny situation because it almost feels like, hey, Baker, we've moved on for you, but yeah, Deshaun's suspended. So, hey, Baker, can you play for us?
That's going to be fun. I think he's in a great situation. Like he can just sit on his ass and make $18.5 million this year and do absolutely nothing. Or he can wind up starting and be like, hey, you put yourself in this situation by trading for him first and you didn't get rid of me. So like, this is your problem. Why don't you double my salary if you want me to play? They really screwed themselves in a number of levels there. But I don't know. I feel like Carolina is going to get one of those two, either Garoppolo or Mayfield. But I think they're sticking with Smith. I think Carroll really liked the way that Geno played. And it was like 3 games and a quarter, basically. And he did pretty well for a backup. Like he's not Russell Wilson. You can't expect him to be. But his game is very, very different. And I think that's kind of what they want. Wilson is excellent at throwing these deep balls. He's great at extending plays with his legs. You know, you've seen how many times there's this famous, I forget what season it was, like Wilson spins out and then he's like out of the pocket for like 9 seconds and he's like 40 yards behind the line of scrimmage and then just like desperately heaves one to Baldwin and he winds up scoring. This is against Arizona. It's just like that's his game, but like that is not sustainable. And like I can understand Carroll wanting to have something different, and that's exactly what Geno is. He's going to throw more to the middle of the field. He's going to move the sticks. He's just a more conservative quarterback in general. I think that's what he wants more than anything else. For a while, I was convinced that they would try to trade for Derek Carr or Kirk Cousins, like they want that kind of quarterback. But like Geno Smith is pretty much cut from the same. He's not as talented as Carr or Cousins, but like that same, he's not going to screw you up. He's not going to take big risks and get sacked 17 yards behind the line of scrimmage. He's not going to throw wild picks. I think that's more that they just want somebody who's going to move the chains and do what they're asked rather than just play jazz all the time like Wilson does.
Looking ahead, so defensively, they went from being a like elite defensive team to a team that struggles to a team that is very tough. What do you see the defense? What's the outlook for the defense looking at 2022?
I really like the defense going into this year, actually, but it's mostly like a philosophical change. The pass rush is like going to be the X factor. I'm not sure if that's going to be as good as it needs to be because they were terrible last year in pretty much everything. Sacks, pressure rate, pass rush win rate, everything. They're near the bottom. So they really need that to come together. But if they get the pass rush improved, I think has potential to be top 10, top 5 defense because they're finally moving away from this thing that's been the problem for the last several years. Just too much cover 3, just too much predictability. I forget exactly when this was. I think it was like week 3 or week 4. They were like last in the league in pre-snap motion. They basically have like, here's what we're showing, and this is what we're gonna do. We're showing you our defense, beat it if you can. And other guys are like, yeah, of course. This isn't 2013. Yes, we'll beat you. We'll just like
you don't have the same personnel back there that you did,
right?
When you could just say, hey, try and beat us.
Yeah. I call it cover 3 FU. Like, you know what's coming. There's nothing that you can do. Just like, go ahead and try to beat us. But like, it's not the same. Like Kirk Cousins and Ryan Tannehill, they just dinked and dunked their way down the field over and over. And it was very predictable the way it happened. But they're finally getting away from that. And to their credit, they kind of started shifting this way the second half of last season. But with Clint Hurt, who's the new defensive coordinator, and Sean Desai, who's the associate head coach. He was the Bears defensive coordinator last year. They're going to move more to like a Vic Fangio kind of defense, some more two high safeties, more blitzing, more man. That's the big thing. Like they're going to be able to play a lot more man coverage, especially with Kobe Bryant and Tariq Woolen, the rookie corners on the back end. I didn't get a chance to mention them earlier. If they hit the ground running, that's going to be a big X factor for this season. If those two, like I know I would rather play any other position than cornerback in the NFL, basically what the rules are and just how challenging it is physically. But if they do come in and they have a quick learning curve, that would be a really good sign for this defense. Because if you get those two starting outside, I think it can be a really, really positive area. I think they'll improve in coverage a lot. And you're not going to know what to expect. Like it's been the same defense for 10 years now, basically. But now you don't know what they're going to do, which is why I think after week 1, it'll be harder, but like I'm actually picking Seattle to win week 1 because they know Wilson's game better than anybody. Like they know what to throw at him, and it's going to be it's a new scheme. They have no tape on this whatsoever. Preseason, you're going to get vanilla stuff. You're not really going to see what they're going to do. So I feel really good about the defense going forward.
And so when you look at this team, do you think that the defense will be good enough to overcome what are likely going to be I portray what I feel is going to be a struggling offense because one, they might be able to run the ball well, but you've got four new starters on the offensive line, including 2 rookies expected to be the starting tackles. That could be a long year offensively. Do you think that they can be a competitive team, compete for the wild card, or do you think that they're going to be a bottom of the league type team where they're going to be in the mix for one of those top quarterbacks in the draft next year?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunately going to be somewhere in between them. Like they're not going to be in the running for a number 1 pick. They're not going to like even top 5 would surprise me. Like they're going to win at least 4 or 5 games.
They're going to get 5-6 wins and be
8 or 9 games either. Right. They're not going to get a wild card and they're not going to get a number 1 pick. So you're stuck in that no man's land, which you never want to be in. You're not bad enough to get a quarterback that can turn your fortunes around, and you're not good enough to like sneak in and like possibly upset somebody in like the wild card round like 2010. You're just like they're kind of stuck. 6-11, 7-10 is pretty much what I'm expecting. Right. I do think they will run the ball well, but like the flip side of that is unless Drew Lock takes this like Ryan Tannehill or Josh Allen like jump, they're just going to start crashing the box on you. Penny and Walker, you're going to have 9 guys in the tackle box, and what do you want them to do about that? They're not Derrick Henry, and even him. Like there's only so much you can do. So the offense is going to be bad. Defense will be good. Special teams was great last year, but like if your passing offense isn't functioning like in this league, like way it is,
and if
now,
they
like,
get down a score, That'll be really, really hard to come back.
Right. There's no way they're going to, like, Geno Smith isn't the kind of quarterback who can put you on his back and just, okay, be like Cam Newton in the I forget what year it was against the Eagles. They were down by like 19 points in the fourth quarter. Like, okay, here we go. And just score 3 touchdowns like nothing. You know, they don't have that guy anymore. So you need to get the lead. Otherwise, you're screwed.
All right. Tim, I really appreciate the time. That pretty much covers it. We've got Tim Weaver from the Seattle Seahawks, covering the Seattle Seahawks for SeahawksWire.com. You can find him at that site. Are you on social media at all, Tim?
I am not yet. I am very proud of not being on social media. But
So his work you can find on SeahawksWire.com. Something that you will find some of his stuff popping up on CardsWire is during the offseason. We often do our NFC West roundup. Some stories from each team in the NFC West, and so usually on Sundays we'll have a post about some Seahawks stories that Cardinals fans should know about, and you will see Tim's work there. Tim, thank you again. 3rd year in a row we've had you on the preview show. I really appreciate it, and that'll wrap up this one. That's Tim Weaver from SeahawksWire.com.
Sure, thanks.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, we have the final of our NFC West previews with the San Francisco 49ers, whom the Cardinals will face twice late in the season. So that's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. Next up on our opponent previews is the 49ers. And for the 3rd year in a row, close friend of the show, Kyle Madson from NinersWire.com, joins me on the Rise of Sea Red podcast to talk about the 49ers. Kyle, who has been covering the team as long as I can remember. Like, you were already doing Niners when I came on in 2016?
No, I got my start. Yeah. I was a contributor with Niners.
Oh, that's right, because you got Biederman there, was running the show then.
Yeah, I started contributing under Biederman, and then when they launched Titans before the 2017 season, they gave me that site. And so I did Titans for 2 seasons, I think. A season.
I don't even remember you. Wow.
Titans. Yeah, dude. Titans. Tighten up.
Well, anyway, Kyle and I
never going to do me any good.
Well, because one of the guys I'd worked with at the school, because I teach high school in my day job, on my parallel careers, I teach high school, and Kyle's one of Kyle's best friends taught at my school for the last decade with me. So it was kind of a small world in that sense, but Kyle, a guy I admire a lot, one of the funniest guys you'll find on Twitter and in our Slack channel. But here to talk about the 49ers as we look ahead to the 2022 season. We'll look back at what happened last year, what's happened this offseason. Of course, the talk will center around the quarterback position for sure, and look ahead to the outlook for the 2022 season. So Kyle, we look back on last season, the Niners ended up quite successful, making it to the NFC Championship game, ultimately faltering to the Rams, who became the NFC champs. But if you look back over the last season, what were the things that went well? What were the things that kind of held them back? And then lastly, was last year did they exceed the expectations y'all had for them?
So I'll start with the last part first. I think they were right about at what we expected them to be. They maybe didn't get there the way a lot of people thought they would. I thought they'd be pretty good. And 10-7 in the regular season is not optimal. And I think that had they been better out of the gate, they're probably looking at 12-ish wins. I think that their roster was that good. But when they get out of the gate as slow as they did, the fact that they finished 10-7, what the team we saw over the second half of the year, I think was what I was personally expecting from the beginning of the year, where they were just really dominant on the ground, pushing teams around. And they won a lot of games and went to the NFC Championship and were a dropped interception away from going to the Super Bowl. So yeah, I think they met expectations for the most part last year, even if it happened in kind of a roundabout way. What went well for them, their defense was really good again, which was a pretty significant deal. And they were healthy for the most part, which Nick Bosa coming off the ACL tear, That was a big deal. Jimmy Garoppolo is always a question mark in that area, and he wound up getting a little banged up, but he still played 15 games. So I think health was good for them last year. And their A players played like A players. That's the big thing with this team. It's Trent Williams, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner. When all those guys are playing well, they're a really, really hard team to beat. And Elijah Mitchell emerging as a go-to lead back helped a lot too with that run game. A 6th round rookie last year. He was really good. So that's what went well. What didn't go well is Jimmy Garoppolo just wasn't good enough. Their offensive line struggled a little bit, especially at the right guard and right tackle spots. Mike McGlinchey, their starting right tackle, got hurt. So it was kind of a who's who at right tackle for a while. Daniel Brunskill, their right guard, is league average when he's playing well. And that came back to bite them here and there. And that's kind of ultimately why they fell short.
Now, the Cardinals, NFC West is really weird because it seems like every team has a team in the division that no matter how they're good or bad they are, there's a kryptonite.
Mm-hmm.
Rams can't beat the 49ers, except, they're
in the biggest game of the year.
Yes. And even then it took a fluky mistake
for
that to not happen. The Seahawks can't beat the Rams, and the Cardinals with the except there's for most, if you look over the last several years, that the Cardinals just seem to beat the 49ers. It's one of those weird things that no matter what happens, except when they've got CJ Beathard starting in a game that they just needed to win so they can clinch the playoff spot. They don't. Of course, that's when Jeff Wilson, the stable of Kyle Shanahan, running backs that you've never heard of, suddenly become 150-yard rushers. Whether it's Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, Elijah Mitchell, not the Trey Sermon that everybody thought would be the perfect back for Kyle Shanahan's system. Running backs who get hurt, but someone else emerges as a dynamic player who gets hurt. It's kind of been the way they run the running game, right? That's kind of how they do things in San Francisco. It's weird.
It's the weirdest team building strategy in the league. Like, and you're right. They invested 3rd round pick in Trey Sermon, and it was like, oh my gosh, like a 3rd round pick. They hadn't drafted a running back since 2017, and now all of a sudden they're drafting one in the 3rd round. After getting production, you mentioned Jeff Wilson Jr., undrafted rookie. Matt Breida, who was very good for them, undrafted rookie. Raheem Mostert was undrafted before joining the 49ers in 2016. I think he's a Chip Kelly guy, but he was with the club as an undrafted rookie. So like they have, or I should say undrafted free agent for Mostert. He wasn't a rookie when he got to San Francisco, but they had all this success with these guys that were undrafted, and their one draft pick was a 4th round pick in 2017 named Joe Williams, who never played a regular season snap. So it was like, man, Trey Sermon, he's going to be the guy, like 3rd round pick, like for sure. He's going to be the lead back. And then he just doesn't play. It was like a healthy scratch in week 1, and Elijah Mitchell winds up playing when Raheem Mostert went down, and it was like, oh, Mitchell's just a better back. And then he gets banged up, and Wilson, who weirdly got hurt in the regular or in OTAs, like just in the locker room, like his meniscus just tore when he stood up. But then he comes back and he plays well. So yeah, that's the Niners running game. I wish I could give you more than that, but it just
shows Kyle Shanahan, like, with my group text of guys that we covered the Cardinals, is like, I don't think there's any doubt that the best schemed run game in the NFL has got to be the 49ers and Shanahan. And maybe in part that is because of the flexibility they have with Kyle Juszczyk, who is a fullback, but is kind of like a tight end, but uses a fullback. The skill set that he has and the flexibility that they can do things with 21 personnel that literally no one else can in the league.
Right. Yeah, that's been their big thing, is that versatility, and the same personnel grouping can look 5 different ways, and they can run the same play 4 times in a row, but 3 times it's a run and 1 time it's a pass. And it's just really hard to game plan for it. I think, just to add on to that, and Shanahan having the best schemed run game in the league, they did that with a quarterback who wasn't threatening teams downfield, which is where I get really impressed. The fact that he can create those mismatches with numbers, even though teams aren't threatened deep and are playing up in the box. That's a lot. I mean, the players have to execute, but that's a lot of coaching too.
It is, absolutely. So, cut it next on the Rise Up Seahawks podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the offseason, their additions, the quarterback position, and the players that they lost. That's coming next on Rise Up Seahawks. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. We'll talk the quarterback situation first, then talk about other players that they lost and then the ones that they added in free agency into the draft. But this offseason has been weird because we knew last year when they drafted Trey Lance that it was going to likely be Jimmy Garoppolo's final season, that Shanahan was going to run with Garoppolo, guy who's had extreme success with them. If you look at the record in however long that Shanahan's been there now, 31-14 with Jimmy Garoppolo starting, 8-28 with everybody else. And unfortunately, Garoppolo's still on the roster, which that shoulder injury that came at the worst time, that shoulder surgery. I mean, he's going to get traded, right?
Traded or cut. I just don't know how robust the trade market is going to be for an oft injured quarterback coming off offseason surgery to his throwing shoulder. So maybe Carolina or Cleveland. Like Cleveland makes a lot of sense because Stefanski runs a Kubiak offense and so does Shanahan for the most part. So Garoppolo would at least have some familiarity there, depending on what happens with Deshaun Watson. But
and the fact that they can't really go back to Baker, right? Even though that he's
no chance.
Well, and it's rounding up right now that they kind of burned the bridge with Baker, and then they sign Watson or the trade for Watson, get that huge contract, and now then they have to kind of go back to Baker.
There's no chance. Like there's a better chance. I think there's the. They say never say never. So
I mean, I'm all for it. I want to see it. I want to see this happen because it doesn't affect me. It's the Browns.
Right. Totally. It's just I don't think there's much chance Jimmy Garoppolo returns to the 49ers, but I think Jimmy Garoppolo would come back to San Francisco before Baker Mayfield would go back to Cleveland. And I think it's a very small chance that Garoppolo is still in San Francisco come training camp. So yeah, I think Garoppolo, because we're in late June now. That's about the time he's supposed to start throwing. That's why he timed the surgery when he did, so he could throw before training camp. And I think if the 49ers can't find a trade partner, I think Jimmy Garoppolo and his agent, Don Yee, are going to say, hey, can we get a release so we can sign somewhere in time for camp where we have a chance to compete? And I think the Niners would grant that because like they owe it to him. Garoppolo handled last year about as well as you can handle that situation.
Right. But would they grant him his release with the nudge, wink, wink, don't sign with Seattle type of thing?
No, dude, if I got the chance to play Jimmy Garoppolo twice a year, I would take it. Oh my God.
I mean, true. That is true. That is true.
Yeah,
especially if Shanahan, as much success as he's had with Garoppolo, also knows everything that Garoppolo can't do.
Which is a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. It's easy to game plan for. So yeah, I just I mean, if he goes to Seattle, fine. If he goes to Cleveland, fine. If he goes to Carolina, fine. But I don't think I think it's a very, very, very tiny chance that he's on the roster come training camp. It's just not tenable. Like just logically, it just doesn't track. I know that all these national talking heads are saying like, oh, there's a chance he could be the starter week one. Like there's not really.
Oh my gosh.
Like Trey Lance would have had to be like abysmal in OTAs and minicamp where it's like, oh, he got worse over the offseason, but that wasn't the case. He was fine.
Right. Especially like you said, like Garoppolo hasn't even talked to Brian Greasy. Like,
yeah, the Niners.
He's clearly, they have no plans for him. The quarterback's coach hasn't talked to him.
Right. And Garoppolo said goodbye in his postseason presser, and the 49ers have been all in on Trey Lance being the guy. And you've got players in press conferences after OTAs and minicamp talking about how Trey looks great. Now he's taking a leadership role on and off the field. And it's just, if you try and re-inject Jimmy Garoppolo into that situation, like it worked last year, it was fine, but now you're trying to go 2 for 2 with that. And that's where I think things get dicey, where it could like start messing with them on the field.
Yeah. So quarterback position aside, we know that it's going to be Trey Lance. We'll talk about a little more when we talk about the outlook, but in free agency, who were the key players that they lost this offseason?
Lagan Tomlinson, their starting left guard, is a big one. He was a Pro Bowler last year, granted an alternate, but he still was in the Pro Bowl and just wound up becoming a really solid piece of their offensive line. Him and Trent Williams on the left side is, I don't want to say as good as it gets, but it doesn't get a lot better than that.
Right?
Yeah, it doesn't get a lot better than that. Alex Mack, their center, retired, which leaves them in a little bit of a bind at that spot. I won't go deep on the center depth chart, but their leading candidate to start has like 500 snaps at the position in the NFL. It's not great. And then they lost DJ Jones, their starting nose tackle. He's a really, really good player. I think he's going to have a really nice career in Denver. But they've got to replace him. Hopefully they can do that with Javon Kinlaw, who was their first round pick in 2020, who was hurt for essentially all of last year. So yeah, outside of that, there wasn't a ton of big losses for them on either side of the ball. Jaquaski Tart, their starting strong safety, just signed with the Eagles, but the Niners have a contingency plan for that. They didn't even want him to be the starter last year. They signed him on a 1-year deal late because Tavarius Moore, who is, I think, going to be their starting strong safety this year, tore his Achilles. Moore had an interception in the Super Bowl. And looked to be emerging as a
dropped the interception.
Correct. Yeah. Just kind of a nice little parallel there. But yeah, I think Moore was going to be the starter going into last year before he got hurt. I think that'll play out. So the loss of Tart isn't huge.
Anything like Deebo Samuel, another interesting offseason point from a Cardinals point of view. It's like, hey, chaos elsewhere.
Right.
We've had our own chaos here.
Yeah.
That situation, is that going to get resolved? Obviously, he made it public. He doesn't want to come back. He didn't show up, or was it? He wasn't at OTs. Did he show up at minicamp? I can't remember.
Yeah, he did.
Okay. And obviously there's money involved, but there's also the issue of how he was used, that he doesn't want to be used in the run game, at least not to the extent that he was late last year. Is there going to be a good ending to that?
Yeah, I think so, because the Niners, so the latest reporting on it is from Ian Rappaport, who said that Samuel is looking at this, not about this contract, but about his next contract. And if he's running it, he averaged like 10 carries a game at the end of the year. And from week like 10 through the playoffs, he was at like 9 or 10 carries a game. And when you're doing that and you're running between the tackles, like that's just a beating he's taking. And it's different. I mean, it's different from when you're a receiver. As a receiver, you can duck out of bounds, or you can get down in the middle of the field. When you're running it, you're gonna run into somebody at full speed at some point, and especially with his running style. So I think he was looking at it like, I don't want this to be my only contract, so I don't want to play running back. I think he's fine with a gadget play here and there. But the Niners, we talked about it earlier. They drafted Ty Davis Price in the 3rd round, 2nd year in a row that they've drafted a running back in the 3rd round, because I think he's a big bodied back who can take some of that short yardage onus off of Deebo Samuel or off of Elijah Mitchell, who spent a lot of last year hurt. So I don't think the Niners want to use him as much as a running back because he is such an effective receiver.
But he was just so good at it. I mean,
yeah, totally.
He was
and in the
so
biggest,
good.
Every time they got in a big spot, and maybe this is something he'll want to continue to do, is, 3rd and 7 against the Packers with a trip to the NFC Championship on the line, hand it off to Deebo Samuel. Let him go get 9 yards, which is what he did there. But maybe not, 2nd and 6 in the first quarter, not handing it to him and letting Ty Davis Price or Elijah Mitchell get that carry. I think that's what this is about. I think the Niners are fine with that. I think that the fact that he was at minicamp, and not just there, but like doing sprints on a side field in his 49ers gear, and during team drills, he's standing with the wide receivers and he's chirping at the defense and he's holding a play sheet following along. Like, all of this points to me to him, playing nice and eventually coming to the negotiating table. And I think once that happens, they'll get a deal done. And
once the contract's signed, he gets the big signing bonus. It's easy to like the 49ers again. It's easy to like your team.
Right.
That's good. So the additions, who have they added that are going to be impact in free agency, and then who are the guys in the draft that you see making an impact this year? Obviously,
I'm glad you said the draft. free agency, they just weren't that busy, man. Trevarius Ward, they signed from Kansas City. He should help their secondary quite a bit. I
nice
think they're
pickup.
Play more.
I wish the Cardinals would have gone after him, but
I think he's a good player. I think they're going to play more press man. And I think that's something he's good at. So I think Trevarius Ward is going to play a key role. Drake Jackson, who they drafted number 61 overall from USC, he's a monster, man. And from everything I heard, I have a bunch of friends who cover USC and who went to USC and are huge fans. I just hit everybody, and everybody gave the same answer on him. Like, weight fluctuations because of changing roles, because of coaching changes, led him to his production to be all over the place. And he wound up playing like off-ball linebacker, which is not what he should be doing. Yeah, it's nuts. So when he can just pin his ears back and rush the passer, like athletically, he is capable of it and looks really good when he does it. So I think Drake Jackson is going to have a pretty significant role this year. Talked about Trevarius Ward. Ray McLeod. Can I interest you in a Ray McLeod? Former returner for Pittsburgh. He was their best receiver in minicamp, I guess, but that was without like George Kittle and Debo. There's Oren Burks, former Packers linebacker, going to help the special teams out. Same thing with George Odom, former Colts safety. He'll help the special teams out. Lock it in.
Hey,
watch out for that.
Well, and what's helpful with a guy like Jackson is that you've kind of have to deal with, like, first and foremost, Nick Bosa, because Bosa is special on that other side.
He's really
and
good.
So it makes things easier for any player. Now, Kinlaw, he's been, there was the interesting interaction with somebody who covers the team that I saw that. I'm like, what in the world? But
just a disaster, just a total disaster all the way around.
But the one kind of do you think he becomes what the 49ers thought he was going to be?
No, because I think when you trade DeForest Buckner for the 13th pick, and then you use that, you check that. You trade DeForest Buckner for the 13th pick and then pass on Tristan Wirfs, who is really good, it turns out, and they could have used. They trade back with Tampa Bay to the 14th spot, and then they draft Kinlaw. And when you're doing that, you're trading DeForest Buckner and then trading out of 13 to move back to draft this guy. He needs to be at least as good as DeForest Buckner at that point, or in that stratosphere. And he's just not been. His rookie year, he was fine. Like, he had his ups and downs. Like, he had a pick six against the Rams, which was kind of like oh wow, this guy is crazy talented. But then he had a lot of snaps where he just got stoned at the line of scrimmage. So he gets hurt last year. He has reconstructive surgery on his ACL. He has to be really good to reach that like DeForest Buckner tier of player. And I just don't think he's going to get there. Like, he might be serviceable, but when you draft a defensive tackle in the top 15, you need the guy to be a Pro Bowler at least. And I just don't know if he's going to be that.
All right. So we've got the additions, we've got the subtractions coming next on the Rise Up Seahawks podcast, the Bizarre Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk about what the outlook looks like for the 49ers season in 2022. That's coming up next on Rise Up Seahawks. We're back on the Rise Up Seahawks podcast, Bizarre Cardinals Talk on the Web, talking to Kyle Madson from NinersWire.com. We're going to be talk about what the 49ers would look at now in terms of what people think of the 49ers, betting lines, their odds for winning the division, winning the Super Bowl. They have better odds to win the division than the Cardinals. They have better the Super Bowl odds than the Cardinals. In fact, the odds to win the division are not far off the Rams, who I think should be the prohibitive favorites coming off the year that they had. And I look at the 49ers team personally as a team that potentially could underwhelm depending on the play of Lance. But I see them among the teams like the Cardinals. I think the division favorites who won, the guys that won the titles last year, are the ones that are probably going to win their divisions this year. And then the Cardinals, Niners, Eagles, Saints, and Vikings are the 5 teams that are going to be vying for those 3 wild card spots. What type of success do you think that the 49ers, kind of like their ceiling, like if Lance is now, let's not say Lance is going to have a Patrick Mahomes year 2 type things, but if Lance is promising, what do you see their ceiling could be, and how, worst case scenario, what could this team look like?
All right. So that's what's fun about the Niners this year is those 2 things are just so dramatically different. Like, like going into last year, it was kind of like, okay, their floor is like 9 wins. If Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy, their floor is 9 wins and their ceiling is probably 13, maybe 14. But this year, it's like their ceiling, if Trey Lance comes out and is just awesome, is just like he picked up everything over the offseason and he hit the ground running and he's good out of the gate, you're looking at like 13, 14 wins. And that's if he's really good and everybody stays healthy, because I think the Niners do have a really good roster. We talked about their A players, and their A players stack up with any other team's A players, I think. But then there's the scenario where Lance is just not good. Like, he's just an inaccurate passer. He doesn't know where to throw it. And when he does know where to throw it, he doesn't get it to the right spot. And their offense just kind of bogs down. And in that case, you're probably looking at like 5 or 6 wins. But I think realistically, they're somewhere in between, because I think Lance is going to, the big deal with him last year was he did not look good in week 5 against the Cardinals, but there were flashes. Like there were a couple throws in there where it's like, wow, like that's a great play.
And he unlocks some other things in the offense that they didn't have before.
Absolutely. Just by virtue of being able to extend plays and move around. But then there's this other side where in week 17 against Houston, yeah, the bad plays were still there, but there were exponentially more good plays and exponentially more plays where it's like, oh, this is why he was the number 3 pick. So that improvement is what jumps out to me. And so if he can improve over the 18-week season, where by the middle of the year, he's starting to really get it and their offense is really starting to click, I don't see why he can't be as or more productive than Jimmy Garoppolo was by the end of the year, which is not super hard to do just from a sheer production standpoint. Plus all the things he can do. And there's things that Garoppolo can do that he's not going to be able to. Like just with reading defenses, Garoppolo's seen it all. There's accuracy that Garoppolo had, especially in the middle of the field, that I don't think Lance will have. But conversely, like Lance can throw it to all levels. He can throw it to the boundary. He has a good deep ball. Like there are things he's going to unlock that they couldn't do before as well. So I think he can be as productive as Garoppolo just by virtue of, on 3rd and 7 being able to extend a play, and instead of throwing an incomplete pass, all of a sudden he's running for a first down. That moves the chains. On 4th downs, he gives the element of his legs, which unlocks some things for the 49ers. I think they were 10 for 20 on 4th downs last year. I think that's an area they can definitely get better at. So yeah, I think they fall right about where they were last year, if everybody's healthy, where they win 9 or 10, maybe 11 games, and they're just in the playoff hunt. But I would not bet them to win the division. They need a lot of things to go right, I think, to be that good.
And compared to, listen, the Cardinals and the 49ers are kind of in the same boat in that sense. How do you think the 2 rosters, obviously, they're not going to see each other till mid-season, and it'll be twice in like 4 weeks is how it'll end up. But the Cardinals won't even get to play the 49ers at home because their home game is going to be in Mexico. How do you see the 2 teams match just on paper? Would you say that the 49ers have a slight edge overall, pretty even, or the Cardinals have a slight edge overall?
Man, I think the Niners probably have no, because any edge the 49ers have defensively, I think the Cardinals probably have offensively. At least for now. Man, I think they're probably pretty even.
I think that's pretty fair. I think that's a pretty fair assessment.
Yeah, there's things the Niners, like I said, can do defensively that I don't think the Cardinals can, especially with Chandler Jones gone.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other side, there's things Kyler can do that Trey Lance may never be able to do. So, and then DeAndre Hopkins is really good, and I think Marquise Brown's going to be a fun fit down there. So I'm different teams for sure, but I think when you're just kind of sussing out floor and ceiling, Cardinals I think have a higher floor. So if I had to rank them, I'd probably put the Cardinals a little higher, but that's mostly because I have no idea what the Niners are going to get.
Yeah, I have the Cardinals kind of between a 9 and a 12 win team, maybe 8 to 12 wins, and I kind of pegged the Niners right now somewhere between 7 and 10 wins, and because even if Lance isn't great, I think the rest of the roster, if the rest of the roster is healthy, that they're going to be a tough team to play no matter what. And if Lance, like, even if he makes mistakes, that the flashes will be enough to win some games.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And I think too, their offense might just look different. Like it might, while Lance might struggle a little bit, it might take the league a few weeks to catch up to whatever they're doing. And that's why Lance didn't. That's at least why I think Lance didn't play a lot last year, because the offense is just different.
Yeah. Well, because they did look like when he started against the 49ers, their offense was quite different in terms of philosophy. And they bogged things down for the Cardinals, and the Cardinals were prepared for that as well, which was interesting in that game.
Yeah. I'm optimistic because of the arm strength and what that's going to do in the passing game. But then again, he had some real struggles with accuracy last year, especially in the preseason, but it got, I think, a little better over the course of the year. So we'll see once training camp and the preseason starts, what it kind of looks like. But yeah, until I know what he is, it's really hard to say how good San Francisco is going to be, because it all comes down to that position.
Well, and they play in a division, which we've been saying for years is the best in the NFL, I think, because Seattle looks like hot garbage entering this season.
Thank God. My goodness.
What the hell are they doing? Why would you go into a season with Geno Smith and Drew Lock as your quarterbacks?
I need Seattle one time to win like 4 games.
I think that's
just
year.
Once.
I think they're gonna, but I don't 4 wins. I'd rather them win about 5 or 6.
Just stay middle of the draft.
And that way they suck, but they don't suck bad enough to.
But that was, dude. Here's the funniest part is that was last year, and they still beat the 49ers twice. Jeez. Like, it's like what the so yeah. So check this out. Here's how the Niners schedule goes. So they get Russell Wilson out of the division, right? And then they play the Seahawks in week 2, and then in week 3 play Russell Wilson and the Broncos in Denver. Like, that's so painful.
Oh, jeez.
I'm so tired.
I will say that looking like paper, that NFC West is the second best division in football, because that AFC West from top to bottom looks stupid.
Dude. It's ridiculous.
And we have to play them this year.
I know. It's unreal.
All right, man. That is Kyle Madson, guys. Thank you for coming on. Kyle, you can find his work on Niners Wire. Your Twitter, it's not only about like Northern California Bay Area sports, but he does have a very entertaining account if you like.
I have takes, man.
It's some takes and some funny stuff. And what's your handle there on Twitter?
At Kyle A. Madson. That's Madson, Madson. A lot of Love Island talk coming up. It's great TV.
Excellent. Thanks for your time, Kyle. And that will wrap up this edition of the Rise of Sea-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk of the web, episode 359, our NFC West opponent preview. Coming up later this week will be part 1 of our AFC West opponent preview, focusing on the Kansas City Chiefs and Las Vegas Raiders, and then we will have part 2 come out at the beginning of next week. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a few days. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, Sea Red, and of course, rise up, Sea Red.
Roll!